Okay, we're back with David Timms. Glad to be here, David. David, will you update the audience on how far we have come so far with your transformational leadership model?
Sure, David. We've talked about a definition that we produce change and build lives. And we do it through authenticity, inspiration, empathy, and innovation. And I guess we're up to a brief conversation about empathy.
Well, it's great. You know, I get asked a lot of times, what's the difference between empathy and sympathy?
Well, and you probably get a lot of different answers to that. But for me, sympathy is when I feel for you. I go, oh, that's too bad. Sorry you had to go through that. Empathy is when I kind of do more. It's when I kind of enter into the suffering, literally the pathos that you're going through. It's when I get a little bit more involved. I'm not simply the observer listening and going, too bad. Now I'm the person who's feeling it with you and maybe even being a little responsive to what's going on in your life.
Okay. And you talk about one of the key attributes here with empathy is how we listen. We actually had a great talk on a recent podcast about deep listening. And that was an interesting talk, great book that's out there. And I'm curious, when you're talking about listening, I mean, what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, for me, empathy is a three-pronged thing. It's listening, caring, and responding. I haven't really been empathetic unless I've cared and responded, but it's also listening between the lines. It's taking enough time to hear not just what is a person saying, but to discern what is a person feeling. And as a leader, I'm not just leading an organization, I'm leading people who produce an organization. So I want to be able to listen in. I think parents would benefit a lot more by being a little bit better listening and empathetic with their kids at times, right? I got 3 boys, so I can say this. But my wife to pick up the ball for me. But for us to be able to listen carefully, to hear between the lines what's really being said, to pause and not always speak, to be slow to speak and quick to hear would be a really good mantra for many of us in leadership.
You know, I was kind of laughing when you were saying that about listening, particularly in the family, because when my youngest biological child, Jeff's younger sister, Jenny, got to be about 16 or 17, that's when I first learned about active listening. Where you're supposed to listen, repeat back a summary, and do that. And it still takes a long time to learn. So it's a challenge. Now, one of the things I thought was really interesting was you talked about some nonverbal cues that actually relate to listening. I always remember the TV show series Lie to Me, because I enjoyed that series. It was fun. But talk about those nonverbal cues. And I'm curious, you talk about them in the book. Have you ever actually experienced that, where you've observed somebody where they're kind of talking one way and you either picked up on some nonverbal cues that emphasize what they were saying, or actually you thought, it doesn't look like that's adding up? I'm kind of curious.
That happened to me over lunch today. All right, I have to go back 10 years to try and think of a time. So we've all got this nonverbal thing going on. 55% of communication is nonverbal, perhaps. So the person I'm listening to has got nonverbal happening, but I'm the listener, and I also have nonverbal happening. So if I want to listen to, in my case, faculty, right? I oversee a division of full-time and part-time faculty, about 40, 45 of them in total. If I'm standing at the doorway of an office and I got one foot out the door and I'm hanging onto the door frame and I'm just saying, I'm really listening. I'm really trying to get out of here. There's no listening really happening, right? What happened today over lunch, I was listening to somebody else speak, and there was a small group of us, and I realized that for comfort's sake, I'd cross my arms. And I get pretty comfortable that way, right? I don't have to let my hands just hang. I can just cross but it's very closed body language. And the risk is that I communicate to the person who is a guest, I'm really not that interested. I don't find this very compelling. So I actually very intentionally, I didn't say it to anybody, I unfolded my arms, opened up my body stance, put myself comfortably in the chair so that it looked like, and leaned forward just a little bit so it looked like I'm truly engaged. I was engaged, but crossing my arms might have sent a wrong message about me not listening. So I've got to watch my own nonverbals, and I'm also watching the other person's nonverbals.
It's interesting you say that, because I've actually been in that situation, and it's been cold in the room. And I've said, just to let you know, I'm crossing my arms because I'm a little bit cool. I'm not upset or anything. So just to let you know. And I have to do that because sometimes it's like I have sleep apnea while I'm awake, where I'll be concentrating and I don't breathe. And then all of a sudden I'll breathe in and then breathe out real deep. And they'll think, I might be upset because I'm like sighing or something like that.
Right. So interesting, isn't it? Stuff that we don't even think about, but suddenly, no matter what we say, we said something different.
Yeah. Yeah. And in your case, what you're bringing up is an important thing. As leaders, people are watching us, and they're making judgment calls, often based on assumptions. I always remember Michael Eisner, when he was CEO of Disney. He commented in a magazine article that I read about him. He said he has to be really careful what he says, because there was one time he was walking through Disneyland off hours, and he made some comment about some paint or something like that on Main Street. And he came back later, like 2 days, a week or two later, and the paint had been changed based on his just very offhand comment that was kind of like, oh, look at that. I wonder what that color would be if it was such and such. And we don't think about that,
Right.
you know?
Well, and as I'm listening to people, I'm realizing that I've got to give them a chance to also adjust and modify their body language, because they can tell me that all is fine, but if they're completely closed up, they're really not. And if the goal of transformational leadership is to build the lives of the people closest to me, to build the lives of my team, how can we possibly do that without learning to listen deeply, as you put it?
Well, yeah, and you're talking about empathy here, and you mentioned one of your final points is caring. And I run into a lot of employers, entrepreneurs, who don't want to fire someone who's not working out. They don't have a good process for it. They keep people too long. And do you have any kind of guidelines for somebody who is a transformational leader on how you can care, but your boundaries can be firm?
Well, that's exactly the point right there. It's to care with firm boundaries, right? It's not to care as the end in and of itself. The purpose for caring is to build lives. And the purpose for building lives is so that we can also build this business, this company, this organization, whatever it might be. And if I am mindful of the ultimate goal is the health of the organization or the health of the family, then that creates a boundary. And at some point, my care for you or your need for my care starts to become detrimental to either the family or to the organization, then we have to have a boundary, be clear about the boundary, draw the line, and just work within that.
Well, it may not sound right, but I think that's a good place to end the empathy segment. And I think it's where, you brought that up, how you have to manage that, balance that for people. So I'd encourage leaders to really think about that. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you, David. And we're going to be back for one more so we can wrap up your transformational leadership model.
Great. Thanks, David.